Hi, everyone, and welcome. I am joined today by Scott Ritter, a former intelligence officer in the US Marine Corps and a former UN weapons inspector. And yeah, I'm very glad to see you again. I really wanted to ask you about Trump's new approach, especially towards Iran. That is, Trump considers himself to be, I guess, this great deal maker, and he tends to lean very heavy into the maximum pressure to get what he wants. And he has now, yeah, threatened Iran with war unless they accept his deal. Of course, also escalating the rhetoric towards Russia with threats of sanctions. But yeah, if we start with Iran, how do you assess this? Is he likely to get the deal he wants? And if not, do you think he will follow through on this ultimatum and pursue war?
There's a lot of speculation that has to go into this. I will say this, that we don't move, we being the United States, we don't move military forces around lightly. And so once you see an accumulation of military power that reaches a certain benchmark, war becomes more or less inevitable. I don't think we're at that point yet, but we are seeing military resource flow into the Middle East region. And so I would take the threats of military action very seriously. And I honestly believe that Trump would, in fact, use military force against Iran to achieve his objective of eliminating what he deems to be a nuclear program capable of producing nuclear weapons. Um, One of the problems with his approach, though, is that when you have a nation like Iran that is very proud, um, that use their nuclear program as an extension of the nation. Um, they're A, loath to give up this program, and B, um, resistant to being seen as yielding, bending the knee, so to speak, because once you get accustomed to bending the knee, then people expect that to be the outcome. And so there is resistance from it within Iran as well. I think within Iran, there's many people who have been living under the threat of imminent American military action for years. Just as, Benjamin Netanyahu and others have been saying that Iran is, a month, 2 months away from the bomb for 30 years now. Um, Iran has been told, if you don't do this, we will bomb you for 30 years. And so I think there's many people in Iran that believe that they could ride this out. I think what's happening, though, is that Iran is being told by um, the regional players and by international partners and international players whom they interact with that Trump isn't bluffing, that this is genuinely a real threat, almost an existential threat to Iran. Um, and I think we might see Iran find a way to a negotiating position. I don't think it'll be direct negotiations between Iran and the United States. I think this will be done through a third party, maybe Russia, maybe China, maybe both. But I think there's a growing realization in Iran that this is different and that there will have to be some sort of negotiated outcome if Iran wants to avoid war.
And what would a possible deal perhaps look like? Is the United States mainly interested in, well, I guess not just reviving the JCPOA, but also scaling back some of the enrichment processes the Iranians have been going through? Or do they also want limitations on the ballistic missiles and overall weapon systems? I guess what kind of deal would do you think Washington could make its peace with?
I mean, there's no doubt that Trump has expressed his frustration over Iran's posturing in the region as the head of the axis of resistance. And of course, we would prefer it if Iran didn't support Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi. But I think at this juncture, we're not willing to go to war over those issues. Those issues do not pose an existential threat to the American ally Israel. The only issue that does pose an existential threat that could justify um, a war that would be devastating for the United States and the world would be Iran's nuclear program. Um, I don't even think ballistic missiles can be brought into the equation at this point. I do think that the Trump administration would seek to resolve this issue and then have continuing dialogue to try and bring some sort of restrictions to these others. But I do believe that if there's going to be a negotiated way out of this conflict, um, it'll be solely about Iran's nuclear program. Uh, the extent to which Iran is willing to back down is unknown. But what we do know is this: Iran has a significant stockpile of 60% enriched uranium hexafluoride, which is just one step away from being turned into weapons grade with uranium. Um, I think that will have to be put on the table, that Iran cannot be allowed to accumulate 60% enriched uranium. And I do believe that there will have to be strict monitoring of Iran's centrifuge capabilities. I think what's important here is that Iran, what killed the agreement last time was that the agreement was predicated on the notion that Iran was going to be slapped with this 1 year breakout window. And that was a time frame that was deemed acceptable by the United States and its Western partners. That if Iran chose to violate the JCPOA, which they didn't, but if they chose to violate it, it would take them a year to acquire sufficient fissile material to produce a nuclear weapon. We're in a situation now where Iran is literally 1 or 2 weeks away from having that breakout. I don't know what an acceptable number is to the Trump administration, but I do think that there will have to be a substantial amount of time built into the breakout scenario window, meaning that whatever this agreement ends up looking like, it will have had to tie Iran's hands um, permanently. Because one of the problems that Trump had was these sunset clauses that while restrictions look good today, but in 10 years, these sunset clauses go away and suddenly that breakout window is diminished and then disappears altogether. I think whatever deal could emerge would have to, a deal worthy of stopping the conflict, it would have to have mechanisms in place that denied Iran the ability to rapidly break out and produce nuclear weapons. I do think there's a formula there. Everybody is familiar with the Iranian program and everybody understands the capabilities of the Iranian program. I think Russia is a good pick for proxy negotiator because Russia has just signed a strategic framework agreement with Iran where there is a nuclear component. Russia will be building nuclear power plants inside Ukraine, and Russia could be in a position to guarantee Ukraine sufficient uranium fuel so that Iran would be able to say, well, then we don't need this excess enrichment capacity. Because right now, the Iranian program is just full of excesses. It's too big to simply be a program for the limited amount of fuel that they need to be manufacturing. Yeah, if I think that you could reach an agreement as Iran acquires new reactors, Iran would be able to scale up its enrichment. I mean, that could be one approach, but you don't allow Iran to front load the enrichment. So that they have a tremendous amount of unused enrichment capacity that could only be justified if Iran was seeking to rapidly break out. I just think that there's an agreement to be had technically, whether or not there's the political will on the part of Iran and, to be frank, on the part of the United States to accept this is another question altogether.
Well, it seems as if nuclear Iran's position as a nuclear threshold state, that is, having the ability to develop nuclear weapon all the way up to the line, but not actually crossing it, would be a form of the deterrent. So not actually having a nuclear deterrent, but then threatening to cross that line if it would be attacked. Now, if you would have an agreement such as this, again, so I'm privileged to speak to a weapons inspector. How would it be possible? Because I guess as a nuclear threshold state, the materials can be there can be some agreements on and rules, so what they're allowed to hold. But in terms of the scientific and technical capabilities. It's difficult to unlearn the know-how, I guess. Would this be a huge challenge, or is it enough to focus on the material side? And also, if then Iran would agree to this, it would also mean that it would surrender part of its deterrent. Do you see the United States being willing to, on its side, match this somehow by reducing or removing some elements of pressure against the Iranians?
Well, let's first of all stop there. The concept of a nuclear threshold state does not exist in the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. It's an invented concept. It's a statement of reality because that's what Iran is. But the NPT doesn't provide for nuclear threshold states. It provides for nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Iran would not be allowed under an agreement to retain capabilities that made it a nuclear threshold state. That you would have to see restrictions in Iran's enrichment capabilities so that it was no longer on the threshold of breaking out. Um, you can't unknow what you know. Um, and again, what Iran knows is not dangerous. They know how to enrich uranium. Um, I can mitigate against that by putting in place on-site inspection mechanisms that, once we have a mandate that limits Iran to certain um, numbers of centrifuges, certain amount of accumulation of low enriched uranium, I can monitor that. And that's what we have today. We have a very stringent monitoring program that makes it impossible for Iran to break out without the world knowing. There's a reason why we know so much about Iran's programs is that they're obligated to declare these under their safeguards agreement, and the IAEA inspects these programs. But I have the highest degree of confidence in the IAEA's professionalism that, given a proper mandate that defined the boundaries of their investigation obligations, that they would be able to successfully monitor Iran's nuclear program to ensure that Iran did not develop a covert breakout capability. So I'm very confident in that, and I'm also confident that there's not going to be any degaussing of the Iranian brains. First of all, you can't. But the knowledge that Iran has is knowledge that is derived from experiences and activities that can legitimately be called peaceful in nature. So there's no problem with the Iranians continuing to do this research. I do think, though, that Iran will have to scale its nuclear program to its requirements. And at this point in time, there is no requirement in Iran that justifies having the number of centrifuges that they currently have. And so I do think you'd need to see some scaling back. Then if Iran scales up its nuclear power capability and a decision's made that Iran will provide the fuel for that, then you scale up Iran's enrichment program to produce that which meets the requirement. Because excess enrichment capability it really only exists to create the concept of a nuclear threshold state, which Iran is trying to leverage. I think the United States, first of all, understand this. We are not on equal planes, the United States and Iran. Now, I'm going to say this, and everybody's going to jump down my throat and call me an imperialist and all this, but the United States is the United States, and Iran is Iran, and we're not equals. That's just the reality of the situation. We do get to dictate outcomes, and we are dictating an outcome right now. Iran doesn't get to dictate this outcome. You say that their nuclear threshold status provides an element of deterrence. It does not. We're getting ready to destroy Iran. They haven't deterred us. In fact, one could say the opposite, that this nuclear threshold capacity is like waving the red flag in front of the American bull, and we're going to charge and we're going to gore you to death. Iran if they want to avoid this conflict, Iran will have to make some very hard decisions. I personally believe that these are decisions worth making because a war against Iran would be devastating, perhaps existentially so for the Islamic Republic. Um, that doesn't mean that the United States wouldn't pay a price. So too would the world. But we will survive this conflict. Iran won't. That's a reality. But Iran does have to get something out of this. It can't be a complete surrender. And Trump has hinted that what he would um, provide would be the lifting of sanctions. What needs to happen here is that Iran needs assurances from its BRICS partners that the economy of Eurasia will be opened up for the Iranians without restriction. That no matter what the United States and Europe promise and what they can and can't do in the future, that China, Russia, Central Asia, the economy of the East, the economy of the global South becomes opened up to Iran. Um, so that Iran can thrive economically. This is the payout for the Iranian people who have suffered for so long under sanctions. And this would be something the Iranian government could say is a practical accomplishment, a real accomplishment, the betterment of the standard of living for the Iranian people, a better functioning economy, a stable currency. This, I think, if done right. But what Iran can't do is go into an agreement where promises are being made, but there's no assurances of those promises being kept. And this is where Russia, China, and BRICS could have a very important role to say that the United States will lift sanctions, but that Iran can't allow itself to once again become dependent upon American and European investments and things because we've shown an ability to disregard agreements and tear them up. It's like getting an addict who is withdrawn from drugs off the drugs and then come back and you start feeding them the drugs again. Iran needs to find different strategic partners, and these partners need to be ready to open up their borders to meaningful trade with Iran, so that Iran isn't just bending the knee. Iran is actually becoming stronger economically. James Carville said in 1992, he's a Democratic strategist who was advising Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. And this resonates not just in domestic politics, but in um, international geopolitics as well. There's an economic factor to everything, and bettering the economic well-being of the Iranian people, I think, would be a positive outcome for the Iranian government.
That's fascinating because yeah, you get the impression from Iran as well that they wouldn't want to make a deal because they don't think they can trust the US. And, well, let's be honest, can't really blame them for this. But, yeah, of course, linking the economic solution to the East, to China, Russia, and that could alleviate it. And as well, these countries don't want to see a nuclear weapon in Iran as well. However, if Iran doesn't want to follow through on this and believing that yeah, the military solution by the US is a bluff, what can actually be achieved by both sides on the battlefield? Because you said that Iran would be destroyed. Are we talking then about the possibility of nuclear weapons, or do you see its cities being bombed out, or its military infrastructure, or is just its nuclear program being destroyed? Because again, usually Iran can play the card that it can shut down a lot of the energy corridors and yeah, maritime, well, commercial traffic. So, well, what do you think could happen on the battlefield? Because again, if the US musters all its firing power, I don't doubt it can do a lot of damage. But at least from what I hear, a lot of they have a lot of deep underground storages for their missiles and drones. And yes, we've seen from Yemen, it's not very easy to defeat such an adversary. And of course, Iran is a massive and somewhat, yeah, powerful country. Of course, not equal to the United States, very much agree. But what could be achieved on the battlefield from them and from Iran, that is,
Now, let me
from American
preface
Iran?
this by saying I am not advocating for this to happen.
No.
But I am a military professional who has planned military operations, and I know what goes into the thinking behind targeting, etc. Trump's been down this road before. In his first presidency, the Iranians shot down an RQ-4 Global Hawk drone over the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians claimed that it was over Iranian airspace when it was shot down. Trump was, you know, making noise that he was going to launch a retaliation strike against the Iranian surface-to-air missile batteries that shot down the RQ-4. The Pentagon briefed him that this could lead to a ladder of escalation that resulted in the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz. And then, as we responded, the Iranians would respond in kind, and that ultimately we would be in a situation where international energy security would have been destroyed, and that it would take the United States months, if not years, to accumulate sufficient military power to be able to physically defeat Iran. And Trump backed down because of this. So, having gone through that experience, I would be hard pressed to believe that Trump, knowing what he knows, would simply replay that scenario because it's a unacceptable outcome. If you allow a conflict between the United States and Iran to go up the escalation ladder, you're playing to Iran's strengths, not the strengths of the United States. And we know that Trump took this seriously because one of the problems faced by the United States were these deep underground facilities, Firdos and others, where nuclear capacity has been buried. And it was assessed back then that these could not be taken out with conventional weapons, even our largest conventional weapons. And that's been proved positive recently by two B-2 Spirit bomber strikes against Ansarallah in Yemen, where they struck underground facilities and they weren't able to destroy them using the largest bomb in American non-nuclear bomb in America's arsenal. Trump, when he was president last time, promulgated a new nuclear posture and then a new nuclear employment plan. The posture said that we had to develop weapons specifically capable of taking out these underground nuclear facilities. And we did. We fielded the B-61-12 bomb, which is a dial-yield gravity bomb that can be delivered by the B-2. And it is capable of taking out Iran's buried nuclear facilities. We have developed the W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon that can be deployed on a Trident missile aboard Ohio-class submarine. And again, the concept is the velocities and the combination of velocity, penetration, and the nuclear charge would enable the United States to destroy underground facilities. Now, so first of all, I would imagine that from the very start, the first actions taken by the United States, other than taking down Iran's air defense capabilities, would be the elimination of their nuclear program. And this would be done with extreme violence. I think if they go that route, you're probably looking at the United States trying to achieve some sort of regime change activity, and that you would see similar strikes against Iran's underground command and control, where the leadership would have withdrawn in Mashhad outside of Tehran. And if these are of the nature that they can't be destroyed with conventional munitions, then the low-yield penetrating nuclear weapons would be used as well. I don't believe that this is going to be a drawn-out months-long campaign. I think this is going to be an extremely short, violent, nation-killing event by the United States. And I believe that if it's going to fit that definition, that the United States would have to use the nuclear weapons designed for this purpose. That's the point I want to make. It's not as though we're reaching out saying, can we incorporate nuclear weapons? It's that we said this is a problem set that can only be solved by nuclear weapons. And then we built those nuclear weapons and we've deployed those nuclear weapons. And now we're saying that problem set is there. We're going to act on it. So logic is that we're going to use nuclear weapons against Iran. That's mind-numbing. One would like to believe we lived in a world where that would never be considered. But I want to remind people what I've been saying for some time now. The United States has had a nuclear posture since the time of George W. Bush, which allows us to use nuclear weapons preemptively against non-weapons of mass destruction type targets. Now, the Iran nuclear program is by definition a weapons of mass destruction type target. But we've been preparing for this. We've had this capacity. And so it's not a big we have the plans to do this. It's not as though Trump is turning to Strategic Command and saying, come up with a nuclear strike plan against Iran. Command has had a nuclear strike plan against Iran for many years now. We've been training for this, preparing for this. We've collected the intelligence on this. Um, and as capable as Iran is, I don't believe they have the capacity to stand toe to toe with the United States when it comes to the employment of American strategic strike capabilities. This is big boy rules. People say, well, we haven't done much against the Houthi. I want to remind people that we are not engaged in a nation killing exercise against the Houthi. We're engaged in a limited scope and scale deterrence strike. Um, the last time we did a regime ending aerial campaign was the strategic air campaign against Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. Um, and our weapons have become so much better than they were back then. But that was a campaign that targeted, across Iran's, I think it was 5 different categories of target sets, command and control, energy, etc. I believe that this campaign against Iran would be a similar one of a shorter duration, but we would be striking target sets as part of a strategic air campaign designed to destroy the Iranian nation, not just destroy the Iranian nuclear program, which is why uh, when I look at that and I look at the nightmare that this would be, I continue to hope and pray for a negotiated settlement.
Oh, I agree. In a war against Iran, this would be such a disaster on a massive scale. But do you see the possibility of other countries being pulled into it, or would it simply be a U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, or would because it seems likely the Iranians would target U.S. bases in Arab states. Would they get pulled into this war? And I can't imagine the Chinese or the Russians joining in on the fight, but you see them sending some powerful weaponry which could be used against Americans, or how? Well, again, I'm asking maybe too much of staring into a crystal ball, but based on
Yeah.
their interests and their preparedness, I guess I just don't see either of those countries being prepared to. Um, yeah, to enter war with America, but I could see them wanting to improve or assist Iran in fighting back in other ways.
Well, I agree with your assessment. I don't believe either Russia nor or China will become directly involved in this conflict. Uh, Russia has signed certain agreements with Iran of a military nature, and there's been talk of Russia providing Iran with uh, specific types of weaponry, advanced uh, fifth generation fighters or fourth generation fighters, advanced surface to air missile capabilities, the S-400, etc. But these don't exist in the numbers necessary to be able to tilt the balance in favor of Iran. And again, I just want to reiterate to people that strategic command is not a joke. It exists to destroy the world. It takes its mission very seriously. They train for this nonstop. They have weapons developed for this very purpose. And I, I mean, for instance, I have a dear friend, Saeed Mirandi, Professor Mirandi, and I think the world of this man, and I respect him greatly. Um, and he has every right to take umbrage at what the United States is doing, every right. Um, but sometimes I hear him posturing about the strength and ability of Iran, and I again, I see him as waving a red flag in the face of an American bull. You're going to die. Um, what does again the American strategy? I don't believe will be to play to Iran's strengths. Um, one way you play to Iran's strength is to drag this conflict out over an extended period of time, not to deal a killing blow, and to destroy capacities to resist. The other thing that's happening, I believe, is, for instance, right now we see in Greece, there's a joint training exercise between the United States, Israel, I think it's Oman and the United Arab Emirates. Why? Why are they doing training of this nature? It's not that Oman and the United Arab Emirates are going to be flying resources into the Mediterranean area to assist. It's because Israel and the United States will be flowing resources into the Persian Gulf region. Um, And these nations may be saying that we will defend our rights and they may participate. We've heard stories where behind the scenes, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and maybe Kuwait have sent a message to the Iranians saying that we won't allow the United States to use bases. But at the end of the day, we're not going to ask permission. We're going to do what we need to do. I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying that this is the reality of it. And also, the first Iranian missile that hits a Saudi oil facility will be the end of any Saudi reticence against supporting the United States. And that's a point that I would bet our diplomats are making over and over and over again, that your best bet for survival is to enable the United States to deliver the knockout blow on day one. Which is what we will seek to do. This is why I caution Mr. Morandi. I say that the missiles you think you're going to be firing may not be around by the time you want to fire them because they will have been destroyed in precision strikes by American strategic aircraft that are carrying the weaponry designed to defeat your underground missile cities. So I don't know. I mean, if I were a war planner with the United States, my targeting deck would be such that Iran would have extremely diminished capabilities after the first strike. That I wouldn't allow Iran to retain strike capacity. That doesn't mean that Iran won't have strike capacity, but it also means that if I were the Iranians, and again, I don't want to tell them how to do their business, the moment you think you're going to be hit, launch a preemptive strike. You might as well get those 5,000 missiles out and on the targets that you want them to. And maybe that would disrupt an American attack to the point where, you know, we could find another path to negotiation. Although I don't see the United States backing down from that. It's like assuming that we would surrender to Japan after Pearl Harbor. Either way, this is going to be a disaster for everybody. And the global economy, there's just so many unknowns out there. How the economy will react to this, what the oil market will or won't do. I mean, nobody's war gamed. What happens when you rip out Middle East oil production? Rip it out, and it's not there anymore. What happens to the price of oil? What happens to the global speculation market? We don't know, and I don't want to find out, to be honest. So that's why I continue to fall back on the hope, forlorn or otherwise, that there could be a negotiated settlement to this, because the consequences of failure are going to be devastating for all parties involved.
And I guess after such a war, Iran would likely actually develop a nuclear weapon as well.
No,
If
Iran won't exist after such a war. That's the point I'm trying to
oh,
make. You know, we're not playing games here. This isn't going to be give Iran a second chance. There will be no Iran after this war. That's what I'm trying to impart to the Iranians, that this isn't just your nuclear infrastructure being blown up. This isn't just removing the regime from power. This is eliminating Iran as a nation state. If you go back to the summer of 2023, you saw in the aftermath of the uprisings when that Kurdish girl tragically died in police custody. You saw uprisings across the width and breadth of Iran's, ethnic population. The Baluch, the Arabs, the Azeris, the Kurds, and even within Iran, with the MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, and also the monarchists. And Saeed Raisi, the president of Iran, said in September 2023 that what happened that past summer was the greatest threat to Iran's survival since the Iran-Iraq war. Now, it failed. But the other thing you need to understand is that Iran is a nation that has been placed under extreme economic sanctions. It's a nation that's hurting. What is the mindset of the under 20 crowd, which is a very large group of people? These are the people who in 1979 rallied to the cause of Ayatollah Khomeini, and were the heart of the revolution. And these are the people that today are in their 60s who are governing Iran. But the under 20s today, there's this large mass. Do they have similar motivations? Do they still have the same fervor in their hearts to do this? I think the CIA and the Israelis and others have been, very heavily engaged in disruptive efforts inside Iran. and you combine that with what I believe will be a targeted campaign of eliminating Iran's leadership and eliminating Iran's security mechanisms, that our goal is not just to bring down the Islamic Republic, but to physically break up Iran so that it never again poses a threat to Israel, the United States, or any of its leaders. Um, can we do that? I don't know. But I would say that, again, as somebody who's familiar with targeting and strategic planning, I don't see the United States bombing Iran, walking away, and letting Iran build a nuclear weapon. If we're going to make the decision to go in, we're going to eliminate Iran. Um, and it's a very serious proposition.
Dear God, yes. Well, that's a very depressing note to
Yeah,
finish on, and I really hope some diplomacy come out of this because, yeah, as you said, I think everyone's gonna lose from this. Anyways, Scott Ritter, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
thank you very much for having me.